Hey, Rece, when you hear that song right there, the game day song, do you have to pinch yourself and say, "Man, I'm the host of that show"?
I think what you get is an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
I mean, that's every week. It's always fun. And then we have this little thing that they did before I got there, and we continue to do it. We wait until right before the song has ended and the rest of the trailer sort of playing out, and we all join hands and we raise them up and we yell "win." Like we're getting ready to go play or something. So, it's a fun little tradition, and I think adrenaline is the thing I think of when I hear that song.
Yep, Dap.
Rece, good morning. How you doing?
Morning, Coach. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I know we have to be careful with questions that we ask you because you're talking to the world and we're not. I want to ask you about this game with Alabama. I think Trevor Knight is not as much of a guy that manages the game. Alabama tries to get their quarterback to manage the game, and he has the same kind of skills as Trevor does. But I think this is good against Alabama, not knowing exactly what he's going to do. He's liable to throw in the double coverage and be successful. He's liable to look east and throw west because he doesn't manage the game. But I think it makes it more difficult for Alabama.
Well, I totally understand that, Coach. I think one thing about Trevor that's been really underrated is his ability to run. I mean, he not only can run a little, he's fast. I mean, you see him in the open field. Some of the runs he broke against Arkansas and against Tennessee, he can go. He's a big, strong, athletic kid. Now, what he's not always is a precise passer. And even I was in Kyle Field a couple of weeks ago. And, early on, he threw a few balls that were questionable for sure. But as any good athlete he can get hot. I mean, obviously, Alabama people don't need to be reminded of that from the Sugar Bowl performance. But I do think you're right. I think you're right on about that. He doesn't always play on script. Although I think that, he's not Manziel-esque or anything like that. And with Noah Mazzoni there, they're very disciplined and structured on offense, I think. But he can go off script, and it does make him dangerous. I agree. And if he's strong enough to break a tackle, which Alabama doesn't miss many, but if he does, then he can be really dangerous because he can go.
Yeah, good point.
Rece, do you think Nick Saban I think the Alabama defense, maybe Nick Saban, they're sick of hearing about Trevor Knight beating them in that Sugar Bowl. They won't say it publicly, but they had just lost a kick-six game. I don't know how much emphasis they put into that Sugar Bowl. Will Nick Saban use this as motivation that we're about tired of hearing about Trevor Knight beating us when they play that game on Saturday?
I think coaches and you two guys have been there. You use anything you can that you think will get your guys to. I don't know that it helps necessarily in the game that you're thinking in the middle of the third quarter, I've got to get Trevor Knight, because he beat us. But if you're in a situation like that, and it can cause you to have a little more attention to detail on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday when you're preparing, and it can get you in the right frame of mind to play on Saturday, I think they'll definitely use it. Because by the same token, you can tell that Texas A&M is tired of hearing about how invincible Alabama is from the quotes, and I'm sure that the Alabama defense is tired of hearing about Trevor Knight. There's three guys. I went and pulled up the game box from that a few days ago. There were three guys on the participation chart that played in that game. Anderson and Allen both played, and if my memory serves me a couple days ago, and I'm getting older, so who knows? I think Eddie Jackson led the team in tackles that night. So, there are guys who've seen Trevor Knight were part of that and have had to hear about that for a few years. So I'm sure that they'll be at an emotional fever pitch when the time comes.
We're talking with Rece Davis. Rece, everybody talks about Alabama getting the five-star guys, but I want to talk about, I think they do a great job of evaluating. They go get Josh Jacobs late. They signed Jalen Hurts, who's a four-star quarterback out of Texas. But it seems like maybe all the staff they have behind the scenes, they do a great job of evaluating kids because both of these kids are having special freshman years. I want to get you to comment about that.
There's no question, Barry. They have a machine. They have an army of people working there, and I think that's great. I know some people in some quarters resent that, but what's wrong with it? People talk about giving young men and women opportunities, well, you got to find them and you got to evaluate whether they can be successful. And I think no one does that better than Alabama. There are some people who get there and decide it's not for them, but for the most part, I think that they have done a really good job of not only finding people who can succeed and finding people who may not have been at the very top of the recruiting list, like Jalen Hurts and like Joshua Jacobs, but guys who not only are good athletes but are the right character fit for the program and the way they run it there. And you even see it coming from things that the players say to and about recruits. Whether it's on social media or later, it's like, come here if you want to work and win, and if you don't, it's not for you. And they seem to be almost that matter of fact about it, and that's the remarkable thing to me is the sustainability of the culture that Nick has established there. Because nobody, I'm not trying to say that championships aren't the number one thing; those are certainly the number one thing. But to me, the thing that blows me away is the fact that they are in it every year. That there just hasn't been a significant dip, and that's a remarkable thing, I think, in this era of sports.
You do a great job hosting a show, but also you've done a lot of television work and calling games, so I think this question might be appropriate. What direction do we need to go with press box decisions on plays?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, what try to find out if he stepped out of bounds, if they did this, if they did that.
The replay.
And the reason I say that to you, Rece, is you're the one doing games, so you've got to fill some time while they're trying to decide what they're going to do. So it has an effect on you. So I just wondered what you thought.
Well, I think I understand the desire to get it right, but I think that sometimes we overdo it, and I think there might be, we might have reached a point where I was thinking about in terms of length of game, and length of game doesn't bother me because I like ball, but I do understand that when you start getting in 4.5-hour games, maybe you need to look at clock rules or something like that about when the clock runs and replay and how many times the game stops. I understand getting it right, but I want the officials on the field to be a little more confident. It seems like sometimes that they do let plays go sometimes because if they blow them dead, you can't review them. And that's one of the things that happened, like in the Miami Duke kickoff play last year. In my judgment, was that they thought, well, if we blow it dead, it's over. I'm sure they're not consciously thinking that way, but I think that they become conditioned to having replay there. They also nobody likes to be second guessed. Nobody likes to have their failures pointed out or their mistakes pointed out. And so I think the officials have become a little bit tentative, as not all of them, but as a whole, speaking generally. So maybe the way to go in the future is at some point evaluate a certain number of challenges, and if a coach thinks it's worth challenging a particular ruling, then he does so. And if not, then we put the trust in the 8 guys who are on the field in striped shirts who generally do a really good job.
That's a good answer. I've been wondering about that. I think getting it right is a big answer, but you go too long sometimes. Barry?
Rece, as you look at the top 25, I think the writers, they go off of last year. You look at Clemson, they're always 2, 3, 4 right in there. You got Nebraska, West Virginia, some other teams that are undefeated. And I don't think Clemson, I heard you guys talking on the show last night about the eye test. They haven't passed the eye test for me. Will the committee look at these other undefeated teams with the eye test, like West Virginia, Nebraska, and put them up against Clemson? Because Clemson, to me, has not been very impressive.
Well, maybe not, and I hear what you're saying, but the thing I would counter to that in terms of Clemson is that I think that their wins, I know they've escaped, but as it turned out, their wins have probably been more significant than just about anybody else. I mean, they've got a win over Louisville. They've got a win over Auburn. Right now, that looks pretty good. Even they escaped, but even the win over NC State, is pretty solid. Now, we had Joey Galloway and I had a little bit of a disagreement last night on West Virginia. I understand West Virginia doesn't have a marquee win like Clemson does or somebody, but West Virginia's got a good, solid body of work. They don't have great wins, but they've got a lot of solid ones. They beat BYU, they beat Kansas State, they beat Missouri. pretty handily. So, they're solid, and the defensive performance against Texas Tech was really good. But I think what you'd run into, Barry, is if you get to the end, and if they both have the same record, you'd go to marquee wins, you would go to strength of schedule and all those types of things. And at least right now, I think all of that combination would still favor Clemson, certainly over West Virginia, I think. Now, whether it would favor them over Nebraska, if Nebraska were to run the table, I don't know. And it might not matter because both of them, there might be, a spot for both of them to get in that circumstance. So should Nebraska go undefeated, then they will have beaten Wisconsin and Madison, will have beaten Ohio State in Columbus, and then would have beaten either Ohio State or Michigan again in the Big Ten championship game. That would be a pretty significant body of work. I think Nebraska's got zero to worry about if they were to win out, just based on who they would have beaten by the end of the season.
Yep. Rece, with Nick Saban, do you get marveled by how he just stays laser focused game to game, year to year? He's learned how to handle his team after a championship. I think maybe that one year when they won it, the next year they had maybe what was going to be their best team. They lost 3 games. But I think he's learned how to handle his team. He stays current with stuff to motivate his players. This guy's amazing, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, Barry. I mean, I don't mean any disrespect, Coach Bryant, in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I realize the impact he had came over a longer term and might have had different sociological effects and so forth. But I think this is the greatest era of Alabama football ever. And I think it's because of Nick and the things that you talked about. It's so hard to do now because culturally things are different. There's so much more of an eye among players on, and people have always wanted to play pro ball. I'm not saying they didn't, but I think that there was a time in the past, perhaps, when the college destination was just as exciting and meaningful. And now, for many of the elite players, it's viewed as a means to an end. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But then being able to take that and still have a cohesive unit as consistently as Nick has been able to do is a remarkable thing. And it's one of the reasons why Nick came up during the off season and did we had a college football playoff sponsor summit, and he came up on stage with us and for about 45 minutes he talked about some of these things, and he walked away from that realizing he's not only a great coach, he could have been an unbelievable CEO. He has a knack for leadership, and I think that's why you see among his players generally, nobody, coach, you guys know this as well as anybody, no coach is going to have 100% of his players love and adore him forever and ever. Everybody understands that. But the overwhelming majority of his players are not only intensely appreciative to him, they're also very loyal to him. And I think that speaks volumes for what he's been able to do.
No doubt. Dap?
One last thing. The Big 12 has decided not to expand, which means that Tom Herman will be leaving Houston, probably.
Wait a minute. What, were you saying they're not going to be able to pay?
I love the way Coach doesn't go for all this political stuff. He just tells you like it is. I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, I think he'll leave. And one of the things I don't like trying to get a team into a league with part of the sports. In other words, they could have taken Houston, BYU, only wanted to come into football. I don't particularly like Notre Dame going into the ACC with not all their sports at times or not a regular schedule deal. And I guess it really doesn't affect the Big 12 to be with 10 teams, but it is sort of a league that the Texas people and the Oklahoma people have sort of run the gamut there.
Yeah, my take on the Big 12 and their entire situation has been a little bit different. I have one of their athletic directors actually text me about a week ago and tell me he agreed with some of the things I said in the Houston paper, which were all of this talk about needing a championship game. If you want it for the money, that's fine. And another good football game, I'm good with it. But this notion that they have to have it to get in the playoff is preposterous. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because you look at any team's schedule, and let's say among playoff contenders, just from the SEC, you're going to have 13 games. And everybody talks about that 13th data point. Well, that's a bunch of junk because 3 of those data points at least don't mean anything. So you're looking at really 10 meaningful data points for playoff teams, and 9 or 10 probably, and that's about what you have for the Big 12. They play everybody, they play 9 conference games. They've mandated that they're going to schedule a Power 5 non-conference game. Oklahoma scheduled that, and Houston. Oklahoma doesn't. If Oklahoma had won those games, they don't need another game to prove their worth.
Right.
That's what the committee is there for. If the committee's doing its job, they ought to be able to evaluate the meaningful data points, and everybody's going to have virtually the same number. And if someone, like in this case Oklahoma, and it's probably not the perfect example since they lost a couple of games, but if you have a schedule like Oklahoma had this year, and you've got an extra data point, and an extra meaningful one, I should say, then that should count for you and good for you. But this idea, they're going to end up tripping themselves up by having somebody upset somebody in a playoff game, and it's going to not maybe good for them financially, and if it is, good for them. But in terms of just the competitive nature, they're going to end up tripping themselves up more often than it's going to help them to have that game, in my judgment.
That's a good point.
Well, Rece, we appreciate you being on. We know you're coming in town. Whenever you get in town, Rece, wherever you go eat, you text Bert Sims, and he can tell you the best thing to get on the menu. I can tell you that for sure.
He is a man of many talents, for sure, Bert Sims is, and that would probably be chief among them.
Yes. Rece, thanks. We look forward to seeing you here this
Appreciate
weekend.
Very much. Thank you.
All right, guys. Talk to you later. Take care.